Thank you. Good morning, and thank you for the introduction. And I'm really grateful for the invitation to present my new works on oxide superconductors, which is a totally new topic for me. I was not familiar with that 4 years ago, since I moved to Caen in France. And so the results I will show you today, so they are done in collaboration with people from Thales, so Manuel, which is here, Lucia as well, but also with people from Caen, Sébastien Petit and Wilfried Payet, and most notably with Alvaro Adrián Carrasco Alvarez, who is a joint PhD student between the CRISMAT in Caen, where I am, and with CNRS Thales. So, as you may know, superconductivity was discovered at the beginning of the 20th century, and the observables of superconductivity is the absence of resistivity below a critical temperature in contrast to usual metallic systems. Another striking property of superconductors is that they are perfect diamagnets, and so they can lead to various applications. Notably, the most interesting ones are those associated with no energy loss, which are of prime importance for nowadays, I would say. And so at the microscopic levels, how can we explain superconductivity? So since the beginning, it's explained in terms of Cooper pairs, where electrons are put together. So for that, we need to have an attractive interaction experienced by electrons. And in the original papers from the BCS theory, it's proposed that it is a phonon-mediated mechanism. So when an electron is flowing through the material, it does approach the lattice, and so it's exchanging momentum with the ions, and so they react. So this electron is losing momentum, and the other one is attracted by the two ions, and so is gaining momentum, and so the two electrons, they can be close together and form a Cooper pair. So that's the main mechanism, which is phonon-mediated, but in some other systems, such as the cuprates, it can be also spin order driven, but this is still under debate. So if you look at superconductivity over years, so I just borrowed this figure from Wikipedia, and so if you look over years, the estimation of the critical temperature and the evolution across the materials, we see that the highest critical temperatures reached at ambient conditions, at normal conditions, they are observed for oxide superconductors. So you have the cuprates, of course, but also you have the bismuthates around here. And also the latest superconductors that have been observed in the recent years, they are also oxide superconductors, which are the nickelates. And so today I will focus on these nickelates and also on the bismuthates, which are just sitting right here. And so oxides, they are very interesting materials to understand how we can reach high critical temperature in this system and to understand the Cooper pair formations in this system. So as an expert of oxides, I will work on superconductivity in these oxides. And among all the oxide materials, the most famous one are the AbO3 perovskite materials, which adopt in the ideal case a perfectly cubic cell in which the A side cation is at the corner, the B side cation is at the center of the cube, and it is surrounded by 6 oxygen atoms forming an octahedron. And these oxide perovskites, in fact, they are really appealing because they can accommodate almost A and B cations on the material, and so depending on the orbital filling of these cations, but also on the relative cation size mismatch that we can estimate through the Goldschmidt tolerance factor, it can give rise to numerous structural distortions, such as the ubiquitous octahedral rotations in perovskites. When the tolerance factor is lower than 1, which does correspond to the perfect cubic system, if it's lower than 1, the material, as long as the A side cation becomes smaller with respect to the B cation, the material will show octahedral rotation. And so, depending on the type of distortions we can have in these compounds, it can give rise to several properties, such as, for instance, ferroelectricity, magnetism, thermoelectricity, and so on. And so all these properties, they are enabled through the intimate coupling between the structural, electronic and spin degrees of freedom, which are all connected together, and also it gives a highly functional character to these materials, and so it's possible to play on these properties through various external stimuli, such as strain or, for instance, an electric field. And so, as I'm working on perovskite systems since 15 years, I was looking for systems which are showing superconductivity. And if we look in the literature, in fact, there are only few systems that are reported to be oxide superconductors with the AbO3 structure. This is the case, for instance, of the bismuthates, with barium or strontium on the A-side cation, but also the antimonates, where bismuth is substituted by antimony, or also oxygen-deficient strontium titanate. And so I will focus on the bismuth-based compounds in which, through doping the material, we transit from an insulating state, which is associated with a charge density wave, from an unstable formal oxidation state of the bismuth cation, which should be in a 4+ in the material, but that prefer to adopt the more stable 3+ and 5+ formal oxidation state in the ground state. And so it's producing an insulating state at no doping. But when you dope the material, either if it's barium bismutate or strontium bismutate, it's possible to reach a superconducting region in which the highest critical temperature is estimated around 34 Kelvin. And so I would like to use these systems to use the bismutates to identify what is the lowest theoretical level needed to capture and understand superconductivity in these perovskite oxides. And so can we get more insight on the superconducting mechanism if we transfer the knowledge we get in these bismutates to other oxide systems, such as the nickelates, for instance. So now with the simulation, the question is how can we estimate the superconducting properties? So superconductivity, it's related to an electron-phonon coupling in which we will try to estimate how the electronic structure is affected by the presence of a phonon in the material. And so what we want to compute is the electron-phonon coupling lambda. It does quantify the strength of the coupling between the electron and the phonon. And so it depends on 3 key parameters. So N(F) is the density of state at the Fermi level. So the higher the density of state, of course, the higher will be the electron-phonon coupling. But also it does depend on the frequency of the phonon mode that we will look at, but also on the reduced electrophonon coupling matrix element, which will quantify what's happening in the band structure in the presence of a displacement associated with the lattice vibration. So in the simulations, what we have to do, we take the ground state of the material and we look at the band structure without any lattice vibration in the material. And then what we do, we freeze some displacement associated with the phonon mode. And we look how the band structure is affected by the presence of the phonon, and we estimate the band gaps that are open. So in the metallic state, these bands up, they were touching exactly here, and through the lattice distortion, we see some gap openings appearing at the high symmetry points, and we can quantify the gap opening. And when we renormalize this gap opening with the lattice vibration, so the amplitude of the lattice vibration, we get this reduced electrophonon matrix element. And then we can compute this lambda for a given phonon at a precise q vector and k vector, momentum, moment. So as you can see, to estimate this lambda, we have to quantify some gap in the matter. And so it will be extremely sensitive at the magnitude of the gap we will quantify in the comp. So to do that, we have to use the band structure simulations. And for that, the best technique is one of the best techniques, I would say, is the density functional theory, in which we substitute the knowledge of the many-body wave function, which does depend on 3n degree of freedom, to the sole knowledge of the electronic densities that only depend on 3 degree of freedom. And then this theory, it's an exact theory of the ground state, in which we model static correlation effects, but also in which we can include all degrees of freedom, meaning also the structural degrees of freedom on top of the electronic ones. So nevertheless, it's not so wonderful in DFT. We have to approximate the exchange and correlation phenomena, and notably we have a major issue in the problem in the implementation, the practical implementation of DFT. There is a R3 term, which is a self-interaction phenomena, mapping the Coulomb repulsion, but with the density of the material. And through this term, in fact, it yields a self-interaction phenomena in which an electron is interacting with its own potential. And therefore, this type of self-interaction phenomena is leading to problematic electronic delocalization. So this type of electronic delocalization can be dramatic when you deal with 3D or 4F orbitals in which they are extremely well localized. And so this can have dramatic issue on the band structure. For instance, if I take barium bismutate with the lowest approximation we can do for the exchange correlation phenomena, the local density approximation, we end up with a material which is predicted to be a metal instead of being predicted as an insulator experimentally. And therefore, we have to pay attention to what we use as an exchange correlation functional in our DFT simulation. So the solutions, to correct this self-interaction error is to use any functionals that are more evolved than the basic local density approximation or generalized gradient approximations that ultimately yields metallic system when they are supposed to be insulators. And to that, you can use DFT plus U or DFT plus hybrid, which are the highest level we can do in DFT. But now there are meta-GGA functionals, which are intermediate to GGA and this type of approach, which can reproduce the insulating character, for instance, of barium bismutate. But also, we have shown previously that it's sufficient to reproduce the insulating character of several transition metal oxide perovskites with titanium, vanadium, manganese, iron, or nickel. In this system, we can predict the insulating character with a magnitude of the band gap which is reminiscent of the experimental value, either in the antiferromagnetic ground state, but also in the paramagnetic phase. So in this work, in the works I will show you, I will preferably use the Skein functional because it's a parameter-free technique, so there is no adjustable parameter. We don't have to fit any U potential or anything. It's just the functional, we use it as it is. But sometimes I will show you, especially on the nickelates, Skein is not sufficient to correctly predict the band gap amplitude, and so we will use more elaborated techniques such as hybrid DFT, but that are much more computationally demanding. So the next step is that in our system we want to model solid solutions. If I want to study the bismutates, I have to substitute partly barium atoms with potassium. And so for that, how can we model the cation disorder? We will use the special quasi-random structure technique that has been developed by Alex Zunger in the 90s, which is a technique that within a supercell, a given supercell size, will try to find the best cation arrangement, maximizing the cation disorder that is the characteristic of an alloy. And for instance, if we look at a 50% doped case, we have a distribution of all possible local motifs we should expect in the material, meaning that, for instance, on this B cation, it will be surrounded by 3 barium and 5 potassium, and so on. Sometimes we can have 1 and 5, and so on. And so we have the real distribution we should expect for a 50% doped case with a Gaussian that is centered at half substitution. So this technique, we used it in samarium nickelate oxide 3, the ABO3 phase of nickelates, and we were able to predict through the substitution of calcium the correct insulating to metallic transition. And so this technique, we can apply it to get the cation disorder, but also if we have to deal with paramagnetic state. Paramagnetism, it's also just a random spin on each transition metal element, for instance, and so we can use it and say, here I have a spin up, here I have a spin down, and try to get the collection of all the possible motifs with this guy being surrounded by 6 spin up and 2 spin down, and have the distribution you would expect to have in a real paramagnet. And this, we apply this to identify the metal insulator mechanism producing the band gap in the ABO3 perovskite systems. So now we can look at the ground state properties of bismutate. So I'll focus on strontium bismutate, which was the less studied material. And first of all, we have to do with our DFT simulation is the structural relaxation to identify the ground state associated with our parameters. And as you can see, with our DFT calculations with the Skein functional, we reproduce correctly the lattice parameters of the compound. We predict the correct P21 over N ground state, which is monoclinic. The material is found insulating with a sizable band gap. The material is found insulating as well in experiment, but there was no real band gap value in the literature, but it is in the range of what is observed in barium bismutate. And so this ground state is characterized by 3 key lattice distortions. We have 2 octahedral rotations, so 1 antiphase octahedral rotation in which the O6 group are rotating in antiphase along the x-axis, and we would have the same one along the y-axis, and we have 1 in-phase rotation along the c-axis. But the most important feature we have in this material is the presence of what I call the breathing distortion, which is producing a rock salt pattern of large octahedra, which are surrounded by compressed octahedra. And so it's splitting the bismuth cation sites in 2 different environments. One bismuth cation that I will call bismuth L for large is sitting in an extended octahedra, and all the surrounding bismuth cations are sitting in a compressed octahedra. And so if we look at the structure, electronic properties of the material. Effectively, if we look at the projected density of state on the oxygen p states and on the s orbital of the two bismuth cations, we end up with an asymmetry of the electronic structure over there. So around the Fermi level is dominated by oxygen p states. So it means that we are in a negative charge transfer regime, meaning that the oxygen p states, they are above the relevant bismuth s states there. Nevertheless, we see that we have an asymmetry of the electronic structure. This is due to the presence of the breathing distortion that is splitting the two types of cations in two different ones. Nevertheless, if we build the Vanny functions associated with these bands over there, we end up with 4 S-like Vanny functions centered on the two types of bismuth cations, meaning that very likely these two bismuth cations are similarly occupied. This is not what we expect from the literature, where we expect to have a charge ordering on these compounds. Nevertheless, if we zoom around the Fermi level, what we see is the presence of an asymmetry of the bismuth S states around the Fermi level, with partly these small bismuth cations have partly unoccupied S orbitals, but also there are also oxygen p states that are not occupied, meaning that the oxygen p states are not totally occupied in this material. And in fact, it comes from the charge transfer insulator, the negative charge transfer insulator regime, in which the oxygen p states, in fact, are giving electrons to the bismuth cations. And therefore, if we build the Vanny function associated with these unoccupied states, we end up with two Vanny functions that are centered on the small bismuth cation. And it does correspond, in fact, to a linear combination of the oxygen p states that give you the feeling that these bismuth cations have a S-like orbital, and these states are unoccupied. And therefore, what we create in these materials is ligand holes, and we have a ground state that in real that is described by a bismuth 3+ cation. So the one that is sitting in the extended octahedra is really occupied with two S electrons. And what we have on the small bismuth cation, it is in a 5+ oxidation state, but what we have is two ligand holes that are in fact created on the surrounding oxygens. So the surrounding oxygens there are just giving back some electrons to the bismuth cation, and the two holes that should be created through the charge disproportionation are just spread on the surrounding oxygen instead of really being centered on the bismuth cation. So in this compound, we really have a charge ordering that is appearing with bismuth 3+ and bismuth 5+ cations. So now that we have understood the electronic structure of our strontium bismuthate, we can start to dope the material and see what happens when we put holes in the system. So the idea there is to substitute partly the strontium cation by a monovalent potassium cation. If we do that at low doping content, at 6.25% of substitution, we observe that we have an insulating material with a localized state in the band gap there. And if we look at the partial charge density associated with these states, we end up with electronic structure which is centered on a large bismuth cation, meaning that we have created holes on what was previously occupied by two electrons in the ground state. So we took some states over here and just removed the two electrons. And therefore, we have created a bipolaronic state with two holes created on a given large bismuth cation. And this is compatible with previous reports on barium bismuthate that also observed the formation of this bipolaronic state. So at low doping content, in agreement with experiments, we reproduce the semiconducting state of these materials, and this does agree with experimental data. So now we can try to go a bit further and put more and more holes in the system by substituting more and more strontium. If we do that, so at low doping content, up to 12.5% of strontium substitution with potassium, we end up again with a semi-conducting behavior with a small band gap, more unoccupied states, so we created more bipolaronic states in the material. If we continue to put more holes in the system, at some point the band gap is closing in the material, but as you can see, between the density of state associated with the small bismuth cation and the large bismuth cation, there is still an asymmetry between the two types of density of states, meaning that there is still a charge ordering very likely in the material. And this type of charge ordering, we can see the asymmetry of the density of state up to 37.5% of substitution. And if we go beyond this threshold, we end up with density of state which are very similar. There is very likely no more charge ordering in the material, and therefore we can conclude that in this system the doping is suppressing the insulating character of the material in agreement with experiment, but also it's removing the bismuth cation asymmetry that we have at the beginning in the material.
How do you know these states are not localized?
These states,
Yeah,
this one. So in fact it's metallic, but the electrons are still localized on a preferred bismuth cation. So there is still a charge ordering there. So meaning that there are more electrons on one bismuth cation, not the other one. So there is still an asymmetry of the electronic structure between the two types of bismuth cations, yet, like we have in the insulating character. One bismuth cation is having more electrons than the other one.
But I mean, I could try to understand the first low doping, just like you have an impurity band, and when you increase the doping, finally this impurity band becomes a bands or localized state.
Yeah.
Okay. So they are not transporting this.
They are not, sorry?
There is not electronic transport. We just
No.
put a bias.
It's just the gap is closing, so it's over. But
there's a gap, but you have localized state.
Yeah.
in the gap.
so there, yeah, this is what we get there. It's there. So there is intermediate state. So we have the bipolaronic there. It's localized in the band gap. That's what we expect for a semiconductor phone. But then when you put more and more, you close the gap. There is no, it's not anymore a semiconductor. But yet there is still the asymmetry on the electronic structure, meaning that very likely there is still a charge ordering in the compound. And then if you sufficiently substitute strontium by potassium, the asymmetry disappears, and so the two types of bismuth cations are becoming very similar. So this we can check from the structural analysis we can do on the materials. So we can check the amplitude of the lattice distortion associated with the octahedral rotations, but also with the breathing distortion, which is related to the asymmetry of the electronic structure of the two types of bismuth cations. So for the octahedral rotation, what we see is that when we put more and more potassium in the material, their amplitude are decreasing. And so this is expected since the tolerance factor of potassium bismuthate, if it would exist as a perovskite structure, it would be close to 1, meaning that this material would prefer to adopt the perfect cubic cell without any type of octahedral rotations. And therefore, that's why it's decreasing, because the tolerance factor over there is going closer to the perfect value of 1. But now, what's interesting is that for the breathing distortion, what we observe is that across the different regions at low doping content, intermediate doping content, this breathing distortion is still sizable in the material up till it reaches exactly 0 at 37.5% of substitution, where the superconducting region is appearing experimentally in the compound. And so these results, in agreement with the density of state, it suggests that effectively in this region the two types of bismuth cations are becoming equivalent, and therefore we have no more charge ordering, and superconductivity is very likely appearing at the vicinity of a charge ordered phase where we would expect to have a charge density wave. So in these compounds, we expect effectively to be at the vicinity of a charge ordering. This is what's suggested experimentally. Yes?
Just one question. If you actually integrate densities of states, what is the actual value of the charge disproportionation between the
Alors,
molecules?
between the two bismuths, so if you look at the sphere integrated charge density of states, it's not a very good indicator, because when you integrate the density, there is one sphere that will be more with more oxygen contributions. So it does increase the number of electrons you would expect to have on this bismuth cation. But from the sphere integrated charges, you see the asymmetry. So it's around 0.4 electrons, something like that.
0.4.
Yeah, from the sphere integrated charges point of view. But in fact, it's reversed. It's more localized. You would have more electrons on this side than on this side, but it's just because of the sphere, so you would integrate some contribution from the oxygen p states, in fact, which makes it. So it's not really easy to quantify the charge with the DFT calculation, because there is not a single way to define how I say the electrons belong to this atom and not to this one. So it's very difficult to track this. So that's why I prefer to track the breathing mode distortion, which is directly related to this electronic feature now. So in these materials, we have a breathing distortion which is intimately related to the electronic structure, and so we can look at the effect of the breathing distortion on the band structure of the material. So firstly, we can start with the pristine material where there is no doping. So as you can see, the unfolded band structure to the primitive perovskite cell is insulating, but you see that there are some gaps appearing here and there in the band structure. So the gaps along the gamma air path, which in fact is between the gamma point and the 1/2 point of the Brillouin zone, which is just the path related to the symmetry of the breathing distortion, which is along the 1,1,1 direction of the cubic cell of the material. And you see that there is a sizable gap opening due to the appearance of the breathing distortion in the material. And now we can try to follow what's happening when we put more and more holes in the material. So if we put more holes in the material, you see that the band gaps are closing until they totally disappear in the material. And so this is compatible with what we have observed from the point of view of the electronic density of states. The charge ordering is likely disappearing in the material, and so we lose the gap once we reach a doping content of 43.75% in the material, meaning that at this moment we are left with a single parabola reminiscent of a free electron system in which very likely there is no more interactions experienced by the electrons in this system. So now we have seen that there is a phonomode that is strongly coupled to the electronic structure in the material. So in principle, to compute the electrophonon coupling, we should consider all the phonon in the material, but this we cannot do because we are using very, very large supercell with 32 formula units, so it's impossible to do a feasible calculation for the phonon dispersion curve and so on. But in this system, we have observed that there is one phonon that is strongly coupled to the electronic structure. That's the breathing distortion that is producing the charge ordering in the material. And so we will try to compute the electrophonon coupling associated with this phonomode. So we need the three terms, the density of state at the Fermi level, the frequency of the mode, and also the reduced electrophonon coupling element. So regarding the density of state, in the superconducting region, when we have the parabola, we observe that we have a decreasing density of states oscillating between 0.3 and 0.2 states per eV per formula unit per spin channel. And this value is compatible with the experimental reports around 0.25 plus minus 0.5 for these systems. And so we have a diminishing density of state at the Fermi level when we put more and more potassium in the matter. So the next quantity we need to compute is the reduced electron phonon coupling matrix element. So to that end, we take the ground state, for instance, at 43% without the breathing distortion because it's not appearing in this situation. But then we add some displacement associated with this phonon in the band structure. And then we compute the band gap opening associated with this vibration. And if we do that, we end up with a reduced electrophonon coupling matrix element around 12 electron volt per angstrom, which is an improvement over the LD or GGA calculations that give between 5 and 8 electron volt per angstrom. But also it's in very good agreement with the best calculation we can do with hybrid DFT, which gives A11, or the Green's function calculations that give an upper value to 13, around 14 electron volt per angstrom. And so this scan functional, the functional we are using there, is giving reduced electrophonon coupling matrix elements, which are reminiscent of previous literature using more elaborated technique. So the next quantity, the reduced electrophonon coupling matrix element, we can track it upon the doping content. And so we start with a value around 12. And then if you put more and more holes in the system, you see that this reduced electron phonon coupling matrix element is constantly increasing. And therefore, you cannot just compute this term at a given value expected to be the same for the other doping contents. You have to precisely compute it at each doping content in this system. So now the next term we have to compute is the frequency of the mode. So to that end, we can use linear response by just computing the potential associated with finite displacement of this kind of distortion. And we end up with a mode that is hardening upon putting more and more holes in the system. And at the lowest doping content we can model in our system, the frequency of the mode we extract is reminiscent of what is observed experimentally, which is around 64 millieV for this frequency. So further showing the quality of the scan functional to model the properties of these bismutates. And so we have all the terms we need to compute the electrophonon coupling matrix, the electrophonon coupling lambda in this system. And so if we do that across the different doping content, we end up with a lambda which has the highest value around 1.22, decreasing a little bit when we put more holes and becoming constant. And this value is in very, very good agreement with the experimental report, which is around 1.3 plus minus 0.2. So we are precisely in the error bar of the experimental measurement in the optimally doped samples. So there are no reports of what's happening in the other doping contents. And these simulations are an improvement over the usual local density approximations that give a very, very low value for the electrophonon coupling. But also it is an improvement over the hybrid DFT calculation. We just estimated the lambda around 1. So these discrepancies, they can be ascribed to the fact that in our simulations, we properly modeled the doping contents with the cation disorder, but also we took all the lattice distortions that could appear in these systems. And finally, we can compute the critical temperature, so using the modified Macmillan equations in which the lambda is entering this expression, and we need the logarithmic, the average frequency of the system. And so for this frequency, we took the value of the literature. And so if we do that and report on the experimental phase diagram for these bismutates, we see that our DFT calculations are well reproducing the trend observed experimentally for the bismutates with a decreasing critical temperature when we increase the doping content in the material. And therefore, in these systems, just considering one single phonomode, which is intimately strongly coupled, let's say, to the electronic structure, it's sufficient to reproduce the evolution of the critical temperature as a function of the doping content that is observed experimentally for this system. And therefore, the scan functional appears to be largely sufficient to capture the superconducting mechanism of these systems. So with this study on the bismutates, we have been able to identify what are the degrees of freedom, what we have to incorporate and understand the superconducting mechanism of these systems. And so the next question is that what happens if we apply the very same protocol to the superconducting nickelate? So in 2019, the superconducting nickelates era started due to so it was after several decades of intensive research due to the proximity of nickel with copper in the periodic table of elements. It was proposed since, I think it was in the 80s, that nickel oxide should host superconductivity. So it was only realized in 2019 in a neodymium substituted by strontium nickel oxide 2 material that shows superconducting transition around 15 Kelvin. And so this nickel oxide, the superconducting nickel oxide, they are not adopting the ABO3 material, but in fact they derive from this material. So to obtain this infinite layered phase, that's the name of these RnIO2 compounds, you start from a perovskite phase, and through a chemical reduction we remove the apices oxygen just here, and we end up in fact with a planar structure which is made of NiO2 plane separated by rare earth cations in this system. And so this infinite layered system based on NiO2 blocks, in fact, it's common to several superconductors such as the cuprates, for instance, the rutenates, the iridates. And therefore they are really interesting because they are an alternative playground to understand superconducting mechanism in layered and this time correlated oxides, since we have to deal with 3D transition metal elements. So since the discovery of superconductivity in neodymium strontium nickelate, it has been achieved in many other systems. So if you want to have all the references, you can take a snapshot. I will remove the references in the next slide. So it has been observed for different Si cations. So for instance, instead of involving neodymium, you can involve lanthanum or praseodymium. But also, instead of substituting the Si cation with strontium, you can also substitute it by calcium. And so if we take the literature and summarize the critical temperatures observed in these different compounds as a function of the nickel 3D electronic count, you see that superconductivity is appearing in this region, in a very narrow region, where the nickel valency is expected to be around 1.2 plus, and so we expect to have 8.8 electrons on the nickel 3D orbital. So it appears that this valency is the determining factor to observe superconductivity in these compounds. So in order to understand superconductivity in literature, people are starting from the RnIO2 member, which is just sitting over there. That's with a nickel in a 1 plus formal oxidation state with 9 d electrons. And therefore, to reach the superconducting region, you have to create holes in the system. Nevertheless, if you look at the density of state associated with this material in the infinite layered phase, you see that we have, in fact, a metallic material. And therefore, to reach the superconducting region, we have to dope a metal, which appears to be rather counterintuitive because usually, to reach the superconducting region in oxides, such as in cuprates or bismutates, we start from an insulating material and we try to dope it to reach the metallic superconducting region. Nevertheless, superconductivity is also observed in a different material, which is called the reduced Rudolph-Dunn-Popper material, which is made of n-RnIO2 slabs like that, which are intercalated by spacing layers like that. And when you tune the number of slabs you have in the material, what you tune is the formal oxidation state of the material. So when you start from the first member, you have a nickel 2+, and then progressively, when you go through the different members, you increase the formal oxidation state until you reach the superconducting region. And effectively, it has been observed that for this quintuple layer, it's observed to be a superconductor. So this is another way to understand the phase diagram of these nickels. And effectively, if you start from the left part of the phase diagram, from the n equals 1 member, if you look at the projected density of state in this material, so on the nickel d state and oxygen p states, we end up with a very nice Mott insulator in which the band gap is formed around, so a band gap of approximately 2 eV is formed between the nickel 3D states. And therefore, reaching the superconducting region starting from this side requires to electron dope the material, electron dope a Mott insulating starting material, which is more compatible with what is done with other oxide superconductors. So the idea is that instead of starting from this side of the phase diagram, can we get insights on the superconducting mechanism if we start from the left side of this phase diagram? And so the next member to study is the n equals 2 member, which is just the half doped material. So nevertheless, there is a critical point with respect to the bismutates. In these nickelates, we have an extra degree of freedom in the material, which is the spin of the nickel cation that we have to model. Effectively, experimentally, in this doped material, it is observed to develop, the nickel cations are shown to develop a magnetic moment. So usually, in the literature, what is used to model a paramagnetic state, so I will prefer to use a paramagnetic state just to avoid to have strongly coupled AFM magnetic order dependent solutions in the system. I prefer to use a purely random paramagnetic representation. So usually in the literature, to represent the paramagnetic solution, we use what we call a non-spin polarized, a non-magnetic ordering, in which effectively over all the transition metal elements, the sum of the magnetic moment is 0. But precisely, we impose that we have no magnetic moment on any transition metal elements. And if we do that, you see that for the starting member, the n equals 1 member, we end up with a metallic system. While if we use a paramagnetic representation of the spin with a random orientation for the spin, still at the collinear level, we just restrict to spin up and spin down, it's sufficient to have a collection of what we can have in a real paramagnet. So we ensure that the sum of the magnetic moment is exactly 0, but then we allow each transition metal site to develop a magnetic moment. And if we do that, effectively, we end up with a Mott insulating character for the starting member. Again, if we want to check the reliability of the non-magnetic approximation, we can compute the energy difference of various doped systems, from half doping to a LiO2 system. And if we look at the energy difference between a real paramagnetic solution and the non-spin polarized solution, we end up with a real paramagnetic solution, which is much, much more stable than the non-spin polarized solution. And the energy difference is around 150 millieV, which does represent 1800 Kelvin. So it means that this non-magnetic cell, which is often used to compute the electrophonon coupling and the superconducting properties in these transition metal oxide superconductor, it's not a good starting point because these states would be stable at a much, much higher temperature. And therefore, we will use a paramagnetic representation of the nickel cation ordering. So firstly, we performed the structural relaxation, and so we started from different materials. So the reduced Rudolph-Dunn-Popper material, in which we put now 2 layers of nickel oxide 2, but also we use a half-doped situation in a solid solution, reminiscent of what we did with the bismutate with the cation disorder. But also we involved a more simpler system, which is just an heterostructure with alternating lanthanum and strontium layer, a 1-1 heterostructure. And if we perform the structural relaxation, in all the 3 systems, we see that we have a very large energy lowering event with respect to the undistorted cell, and this low energy lowering event is associated to the appearance in the system of a breathing distortion, producing this time not octahedra, complex octahedra and extended octahedra, but extended O4 groups surrounded by compressed O4 groups with a rock salt pattern. And so we observe that on the magnetic moment associated with these 2 types of nickel cations, we have the nickel cation, which is sitting in this O4 group, possess a magnetic moment approaching 1 μb, whatever the type of structure we are studying, but also the small nickel cation has a magnetic moment which is approaching 0 μb. And so this distortion on top of the magnetic moment asymmetry tells us that effectively we can expect to have a charge ordering in the system associated with this type of breathing distortion. And so we expect to have a charge ordering between nickel 1+ cation and nickel 2+ cation, because in the half-doped system we are in the nickel 1.5+ formal oxidation state. So effectively, if we look at the density of state, we can confirm that effectively between the large nickel cation and the small nickel cation around the Fermi level, we have an asymmetry that is appearing in the density of state. Below the Fermi level is dominated by the large nickel cation states, while the small nickel d states are above the Fermi level. If we look at the partial charge density associated with these states, we see that effectively this is localized on the nickel cations. But what you can see, in contrast to the bismutate, there is no oxygen contribution there. And so it's mainly dominated by the nickel d states in this material. Nevertheless, maybe, I'm not sure if you see further away, there is no gap in the material. But this is due to the fact that our DFT functional is not, does not correct sufficiently the self-interaction error, and so as in highly uncorrelated semiconductors, it can underestimate the band gap. And if we perform hybrid DFT calculation using a smaller cell, because it's too big to perform there with the hybrid DFT, but on smaller systems, you see that the density of state is very similar between the 2 solutions, but now with the hybrid DFT calculation, we see that we have a sizable band gap that is opened in the material. We still have the asymmetry of the 2 types of nickel cations, and we still have a sizable breathing distortion that is appearing in the ground state of the half-doped system. And therefore, in the half-doped systems, we identify that we have a charge-ordered state which is insulating, and this type of charge ordering has been observed experimentally for the reduced Rudolph-Dunn-Popper material. In terms of the infinite layered phase with the solid solution, it might be difficult to get to synthesize the half-doped solution due to the miscibility limit between strontium and lanthanum. Nevertheless, if such a solid solution could be feasible, we should expect to have this type of charge ordering in the system. And therefore, we now we can continue to analyze the electron doping effect starting from this charge ordered insulating state, which is very similar to what we get in bismutate. So since the 3 starting points, so the reduced Rudolph-Dunn-Popper heterostructure or solid solutions give the same results, we just decided to focus on a solid solution which is much easier for us to perform in the simulation. And therefore, if we put more and more electrons on the nickel cation, so we can track the breathing distortion amplitude versus the 3D electronic count, but also here we can follow the nickel cation magnetic moment asymmetry as a function of the doping content. And what you see is that starting from the half dope situation where we have the charge ring, the breathing distortion progressively disappears, the magnetic moment asymmetry also disappears, and when it's nearly zero, it does correspond exactly where the superconducting region appear experimentally. And therefore, it means that the superconducting region should be at the vicinity of a charge ordering if we start from the left side of the phase diagram instead of starting from this side of the phase diagram. And so the existence of charge ordering and insulating phases associated with these intermediate doping contents are effectively observed experimentally in the next member, which we sit just right here, and it's observed with a metal insulator transition around 100 Kelvin. And therefore, in these compounds, superconductivity is at the vicinity of a charge ordered phase, and it appears to be very similar to what we observed in the bismutate. So now we can look at the band structure in the compound, now in the superconducting region, which is estimated to appear for this solid solution. And if we do the unfolding of the band structure in the primitive P4MMM cell, which is the high symmetry cell for the infinite layered phase, we end up with a single band problem dispersing around the Fermi level. And if we look at this precise parabola, if we project it on the different contributions we can get, we see that there is no oxygen contribution, and it is effectively dominated by the nickel distates. And so this single band problem that we observe with our paramagnetic calculation are in agreement with the experimental data analysis. This guy just took all the available experimental data and fitted with different models and found that it should be a single band problem. And so our DFT band structure also closely match what we can get from dynamical mean field theory calculation, which are more elaborated techniques, in which they also observed a single band problem centered at the A point of the Brillouin zone. But this is in contrast with the usual non-magnetic approximation that is used in the literature that do predict a two-band problem and two bands contributing around the Fermi level. So now, in these systems, like in the bismutate, we have identified that we have a phonon that is strongly coupled to the electronic structure. Again, this is the breathing distortion. So we will restrict the electrophonon coupling to this precise phonon mode. And therefore, we still have to compute the different contributions. So we will focus on the D term, which is the most important one. So if we do that in the superconducting region of the material, so we take the ground state electronic structure, and we freeze in some amplitude associated with this vibration, we see that we have a gap opening which is estimated to 0.64 eV with the scan functional. And so it would yield reduced electrophonon coupling around 5 electron volt per angstrom. Nevertheless, as I showed you before, the scan functional is underestimating the band gap properties associated with these nickel oxides. And therefore, what we did, for some model systems, we recomputed the gap openings, and we estimated that with hybrid DFT calculations on model system associated with this nickel oxide, we expect to have 40% of improvement on this type of gap opening. And therefore, we would expect to have a reduced electron-phonon coupling matrix element around 7.5 electron volt per angstrom. And so if we do that for the different composition around within the superconducting region, we have a non-monotonous behavior for the D matrix element, which is slightly increasing when we put more and more electrons, and then slowly decreasing. So with HSE calculation, it would improve the value of this reduced electron-phonon coupling matrix element. And if we use that to compute the lambda, the electron-phonon coupling constant, we end up with this behavior with a very low lambda at this D filling, but then it's strongly increasing and then slowly decreasing. And what's amazing is that the computed lambda with our model, we have a value around 0.51 for this nominal valence of the nickel cation, And this lambda does agree with the experimental analysis of Talent-Ceph, which identifies that the lambda in this system should be around 0.58 and 0.60. And so within the crude approximation we are doing, we are able to reproduce the nice trend and the nice value for the optimally doped nickelates there. And finally, using the modified Macmillan equation, we can again compute the critical temperature versus the doping content. So in blue, I report the experimental value observed for the doped lanthanum nickelate. And with the orange diamond, that's our DFT calculations using the lambda that we have fitted previously. And you see that across the different members, we reproduce nicely the behavior that is observed experimentally in these compounds. And therefore, we conclude that superconductivity in these nickelates could be possibly dominated by an electrophonon-coupling phenomena, which is compatible with what's also suggested recently in the literature. That superconductivity in this case is at the vicinity of a charge ordered phase, but only if we start from the left side of the phase diagram instead of starting from the infinite layered phase. Okay. And just to finish, I want to insist on the role of the local spin formation there, which is sometimes neglected in the literature, notably on some papers that ruled the existence of an electrophonon coupling in these nickelates. So for instance, if we look at the potential energy surface associated with the breathing distortion, so we start from the undistorted cell and we add some displacement associated with this type of distortion. And we do that in the half-doped system where we expect to have the disproportionation effects. You see that with the paramagnetic calculation, we can predict the existence of this distortion with the paramagnetic order in our simulation. If we repeat the calculation with a non-spin polarized solution, you see that dramatically this type of simulation will never predict that these half-doped materials could exhibit or should exhibit a charge ordering in the material. This type of disproportionation distortion will never appear in the matter. And this is in contrast to other calculations we can perform with simpler magnetic orders, such as the most simplest spin polarized solution, which is a ferromagnetic calculation, which also predicts that we should stabilize a bit of breathing distortion, and so we should predict a charge disproportionation, and so a charge ordering in these half-doped materials. And therefore, it's important in this type of simulation to include the relevant degrees of freedom in this system. And therefore, we conclude that, in fact, these nickelates, they are more or less bismutates plus just a spin. You can identify they are bismutates. They have the same behavior than bismutates. But for that, you have to take into account the spin degree of freedom in these materials. And so with that, I would like to thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. So it's time for questions.
So thanks for the talk. Very nice results. In the nickelates,
Wait.
to just observe or charge ordering, so you can get spin ordering or?
On my simulations, so you can check at the spin ordering, so the spin moment you have on each type of nickel cation, and effectively, what we see there is the asymmetry that we can direct up there. You can the table, yeah. We see the asymmetry of the two types of nickel cations. So for sure, it's not exactly zero there, because with the paramagnetic order, each nickel cation has a different potential. So sometimes it has 4 spin up and 2 spin down, so it does change its spin polarize a little bit this cation, but it's close to zero. So clearly we see the asymmetry 1, 0. So with these ground states, I also observe the charge ordering by building the Vanni functions associated with the insulating state. And clearly, we can only build Vanni functions on this side, nothing here.
Okay,
So clearly, we can see it. Yeah. And so this is observed experimentally, only in this compound. So far, this type of solid solution has not been synthesized. Very likely, that's the miscibility limit of the strontium within the lanthanum nickel oxide 2 structure.
Any other question?
You were mentioning that it's hard to define like the spheres to integrate the charge around. Did you try like atoms in molecules or
Alors,
electron localization function to do that, or?
so no, the electron localization function we didn't try. We tried the Bader charge analysis,
The Bader.
which is another one. And in this case, effectively, this has more electrons than this one. But you don't have finally one with one more electrons than the other one. You see that there is a difference, but it's not 1 and 0 exactly.
Any other question?
I have a question, probably the next slide, or maybe in two. No, the next one, probably. There was a table with the difference between the magnetic moments of the nickel, L, and SU.
This one.
No, but it was two after that, or three after that, where it was considered like the difference was. It was a graph. Yeah, this
Yeah,
one. Sorry, yes.
Okay.
So the difference is around 0.1 in this case. It's less than that.
On this graph?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, there is an error. No, it's going between 1 and 0. So sorry, yes, effectively, I did. Ooh, yeah,
Okay.
it's the same scale and this one. No, it's between 0 and 1. So there it's the 0 and there it's the 1. Sorry, excuse me.
Yeah, yeah. No.
I didn't see this one.
And also, when you discuss about this breathing mode and the direction from the gamma to the 1/2, 1/2, 1/2.
What?
One can see also a gap from gamma to m.
Yeah,
Does it have any role, let's say?
but it's the same amplitude in fact. If it's in the bismutate. Sorry. Up. Let's go back. So I just look on this slide. So you see, it's the same magnitude. It's just shifted along gamma m. It's closer to the m point because when you will project in the plane, the cross section will be at a different position than just the 1/2, 1/4 there. But it's the same gap that is open because it's the breathing distortion that do that.
Any question, comment, remarks? No? Well, let's thanks again.
Thank you.
Yeah.